It's funny, isn't it? Like, we're always pushing for something better, more, progress in every way we can think of. But then there's this environmental impact, this like shadow that follows us. And it feels like walking a tightrope sometimes.
Yeah, that's such a good point. This tension, right? This pull between developing and the environment. It's not just some theory. It's real.
Yeah.
It's in everything. Like in those big global agreements, but also like what we choose at the store,
And that's kind of what we're looking at today, right? You sent me this stuff about Catan New Energies, and at first I'm like, okay, board game, sounds fun. But then when you start looking closer at how it actually works, it's dealing with some pretty big ideas.
Oh, absolutely. It's way more than just rolling dice and trading. It's built in a really smart way. So you have to make these choices
Yeah.
about where we get our energy from
Yeah.
and what it does to the environment. It's like this little world. That shows us the big problems we're facing.
Yeah, and we watched that Watch It Played video, which explains all the rules. And honestly, it gave us a whole new perspective on what this game is trying to say. So our mission today, I guess, is to really get into the core of Catan New Energies. Like, how does it work? How does it show this shift to new energy? What are the tough choices, and what happens in the game because of those choices?
Yeah.
All right, so let's unpack this whole thing. Let's start at the very beginning. Like, how do you even set up the board?
Well, the setup is kind of like the foundation.
Yeah.
For everything that comes after, you've got these frame pieces. They make the edges of the island. And it's interesting that they put whale icons on them. And the number of whales matches the number of players. So like 4 whales if you're playing with 4 people. It's like this little hint about the island's ecosystem right from the start.
Oh, I see, yeah. And then inside the frame, you put those terrain tiles, the pastures. They give you natural fiber, mountains for steel, forests for lumber, fields for food, and hills for brick.
Yeah.
Oh, and that one desert tile. In the video said, like, for the first few games, you should use a specific arrangement. But after that, you can just mix them up, which is cool because it keeps the game fresh. Oh, and of course, no resource number on the desert.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And in that desert, that's where the environmental inspector starts. So it's this neutral thing, but it can really mess things up. And then you have this track, the global footprint track. It starts at 12 for a 4-player game. And that track is going to be like really important. It tells you about the environment in the game, how healthy it is.
So then you've got all the other stuff, the resource cards and the science cards, which you get the feeling those are going to be important.
Yep.
Like for technology and stuff. And then you shuffle up the development cards, plus all the hazard and energy tokens. And that bag full of those brown event discs, I think I got it all.
And don't forget, each player gets their own stuff too. Like everyone gets a player board and a bunch of towns, cities, rows, a marker to keep track of their victory points. And those discs, the fossil fuel and renewable power plant discs, oh, and a warehouse tile. Lots of components. Each one does something specific.
Yeah, and placing those first towns, cities, and roads, that feels like a really big decision right at the start because you immediately get resources and a science card based on where your first city is. It's a clever way to get everyone going right away. And then you set up your starting power plants on your player board. You get 6 fossil fuel ones and 9 renewable ones ready to be built.
And it's interesting, right? There's this imbalance right from the start. Everyone can use both types of energy. But just looking at the numbers, it kind of seems like renewables might be better in the long run, even though fossil fuels seem easier at first.
Okay, so the board is set up. Everyone has their pieces. So what happens next?
Yeah.
It's all about the turns, right? And that video, it broke each turn down into 4 phases, with the event phase being the first one.
Yeah, and that's where the environmental part really comes in. You really feel it. The position of that global footprint marker at the very beginning of your turn, it decides how many of those event tokens you got to draw. Lower footprint, less token. Higher footprint, more tokens. So it's like the game saying, hey, the more damage you do, the more bad stuff happens. It makes you want to keep that footprint low.
And at the start, the bag only has those brown event discs. You draw them one by one
Yep.
and put them on the matching spaces around the edge of the board. But nothing actually happens until all the spaces for one event time are filled. Then you got to check the rule book to see what happened.
Right, the video used the hazard token as an example. So the active player rolls the dice, and a hazard token goes on a terrain tile. That matches the number. But, this is important, a hazard can never go on the same tile as the environmental inspector.
Oh.
And there's also the rain and flooding event, which can put hazards right on top of players' towns or cities. So those event tokens, they have some pretty direct and immediate consequences.
Oh, yeah. And once an event happens, all those tokens go back in the box, so they can come up again and cause more trouble. The video made it clear that the number of tokens you draw is set at the start of your turn. It depends on the global footprint marker right then. Even if an event makes the marker move, it doesn't change how many tokens you already drew for that turn. It's all about the timing and the immediate impact of that footprint level.
It shows you right away what a higher footprint means. And here's a weird thing. If you ever need to draw a token but the bag is empty, that's one way the game can end. We should definitely talk more about that later. It's a strange way to end.
Okay, so event phase is over. Now it's the production phase. This feels like the heart of the game, where you actually get the stuff you need to build and grow.
For sure. So the current player rolls the dice, and then you look at all the terrain tiles with a number matching the roll. If you have a town next to that tile, you get one resource of that type. If it's a city, you get a resource and a science card. You can see how it's like a real economy. You need different resources for different things. Like basic building needs lumber and brick, but to get better technology, you need steel. And you need research, represented by science cards. Getting those science cards from cities, that's a big reason to upgrade.
Then there are the power plants. If you built a power plant on a tile and its number is rolled, you get an energy token, one for each power plant on that tile. But you can only hold 5 at a time. But there's a catch, a big one. If there's a hazard token on one of your towns or cities, it blocks all resource and energy production from that settlement.
That's what I mean about the environmental consequences, right?
Yeah.
It's so direct. Pollution stops you from progressing. And if the hazard's on the tile itself, nobody gets anything from it, no matter how many settlements they have around it. It's like these little zones of disruption on the board, just like in real life, where pollution shuts down factories and stuff. These hazards really slow you down.
Oh, and we can't forget about rolling a 7. That's the worst. When that happens, no production at all, and anyone with 8 or more cards has to discard half. Rounded down, of course. And then the active player gets to move the environmental inspector to any terrain tile, blocking production there. And they get to steal a card from a player with a settlement next to the inspector. So rolling a 7, that keeps everyone nervous. And it stops people from hoarding resources. It's a bit of player interaction, a bit of chaos. It makes the game more dynamic. That inspector becomes a tool to mess with your opponents and maybe get a little advantage.
It's a great way to keep things moving. Oh, and the video mentioned those little dots under the number tokens. It's a neat visual reminder of how likely you are to roll each number. The red numbers with more dots, you're more likely to roll those.
At least there's some good news at the end of the production phase. Any hazards on hexes or towns or cities that didn't produce because of those hazards, they get removed. It's a bit of relief. But any hazards that didn't block production, they stay put. Okay, production phase done, now we're on to the action phase. This sounds like the most flexible part of your turn. You can do a lot.
It is, yeah. In the action phase, you can do all sorts of things, in any order you want, as long as you can afford them. The video started with trading, which could be player to player or trading with the bank. Player trading is all about negotiation, finding deals that work for everyone. The rules are, any trade has to involve the active player, and you can't just give stuff away for free.
It's that classic Catan thing, right? Making deals. You're always trying to get the resources you need for whatever you want to build. And then there's the bank trading. It usually costs 4 of one resource to get 1 of any other resource. Pretty steep. But if you have extra science cards, you can trade 3 of those for any one resource. That can be a lifesaver sometimes.
And having a settlement on a harbor is great. If you have a town or city on a harbor space, you get a much better deal. General harbors let you trade 3 of one resource for 1 of any other resource. And the special harbors are even better. You can trade 2 of a specific resource for 1 of any other. So where you put your first settlement, and if you expand to get to a harbor, that can give you a real edge.
Right, okay. So once you're done trading, you can start building. Roads are the cheapest, just 1 lumber and 1 brick. They let you expand your network, connect your settlements. The video pointed out you can't build a road through someone else's settlement. And it talked about the longest trade route tile. That's worth 2 victory points. And the first player to build 5 connected roads gets it. It's a nice little bonus goal. It can really change how you build your roads early on. It has to be 1 connected chain too. Branches don't count. And if an opponent's settlement breaks your road, you might lose those points. You gotta be strategic with those roads. Think about expanding later.
Then you can build new towns. 1 lumber, 1 brick, 1 food, and 1 natural fiber. You need a road leading to an empty intersection between 3 hexes. And you can't build a town right next to another settlement, not even their own. Towns give you 1 of each resource from those adjacent tiles, and they give you access to any harbors at that intersection. And importantly, 1 victory point. But the video also mentioned this idea of a local environmental footprint, or LF. Every time you build a town, your LF goes up by 1. And a higher LF means a higher global footprint. So every town or city you build, you're not just expanding, you're also putting more stress on the environment. And some events depend on who have the highest or lowest LF. And there are tiebreaker rules too. So those building choices have consequences, beyond just resources and victory points.
Upgrading a town to a city costs 2 food and 3 steel. You take away the town piece, put down a city, and you get another victory point. Cities are much better than towns. They get 1 resource and 1 science card from each producing tile. But they also increase your LF by 1, which again increases the global footprint. It's a trade-off, right? More stuff and points, but at a cost to the environment. You always have to think, is it worth it?
And this is where the new energies part really starts to matter. Power plants. The rule is you can only build 1 power plant per action phase. But some events can change that. There are 2 types of power plants. First, fossil fuel. They only cost 1 science card, but they hurt the environment right away. Your LF and the global footprint both go up by 1. You put these power plant discs on your towns or cities. Towns can hold 1, cities can hold up to 3. The good thing about fossil fuels, they're cheap. 1 science card isn't hard to get, but the environmental cost is real. It pushes that global footprint higher.
The other type is the renewable power plant. They cost 3 science cards, much more expensive. But in the long run, they're good. When you build one, you get to put a green event disc in the bag, which means more event discs in total, so the game might last longer. And building a renewable power plant lowers your LF and the global footprint by 1. You put these discs on your towns and cities too, so yeah, they cost more at first. But they're better for the environment, both your own and the islands. And those green discs. They might mean different events later on, hopefully not as bad as the brown ones.
And both types of power plants make energy tokens when the number on their tile is rolled. 1 token per power plant. You can use that energy for useful stuff, like you can spend 2 energy to get 1 resource card or 1 science card. You can spend 1 energy to remove a hazard from one of your settlements or a tile next to it. And you can even spend 1 energy to destroy one of your own fossil fuel power plants, only once per turn. And that lowers your LF and global footprint too. Lastly, for 2 energy, you can build a warehouse that goes on your player board. And it's really helpful. If you have 10 or fewer cards when a 7 is rolled, you don't have to discard any. That warehouse is a big deal strategically. You can use energy to protect yourself from that 7 rule, especially if you tend to hoard cards.
And finally, in the action phase, you can buy development cards. They cost 1 food, 1 natural fiber, and 1 steel. You pay, draw a card, but you can't play it until your next turn. There are 3 types. First, progress developments. They usually do something right away, then they go back in the box. Second, victory point cards. You keep them secret, they give you extra victory points. You can show them on your turn, even if you just drew it. And if you have 10 points, including those secret ones, you win. And last, there are cleanup cards. These are interesting. You can play 1 to move the inspector and steal a resource from someone next to the new spot, or you can remove a hazard and steal a resource from someone with the same or higher LF. There's also the cleanest environment tile, 2 bonus points. First player to play 3 cleanup cards gets it, but if someone else plays more cleanup cards, they can steal it. It's like a competition for who can clean up the most.
Okay, so once everyone's taking actions, the action phase ends.
Yeah.
Then you pass the dice in the bag to the next player, clockwise. And they start their turn with the event phase. And this keeps going until someone wins.
Which brings us to how to actually win. The video talked about 2 ways to win in Catan New Energies.
The simplest way is like in most Catan games. Get 10 or more victory points. This includes points from towns, cities, and any victory point cards you've revealed. That's the normal way to win.
But there's this other way, a really weird way, that's tied to energy and the environment. If you ever need to draw an event token, but the bag is empty, the game ends right then. And points don't matter as much anymore.
This is where the game's message gets really clear. If the bag runs out, the winner isn't the person with the most points. It's the person with the biggest difference between their renewable power plants and their fossil fuel power plants. A positive difference, of course. If there's a tie, then whoever has the most points wins.
But here's the big thing, the part that feels like a warning. If the bag is empty and nobody has more renewable than fossil fuel plants, everyone loses, nobody wins.
It changes the whole idea of winning. Suddenly those renewables, the ones that cost more at the beginning, they're really important, not just for your own score, but for everyone to have a chance. If the environment gets too messed up, it's a strong message, right? Clean energy isn't just about you. It's about the whole world surviving.
So when you really look at Catan New Energies, you see this tension. It's like a tug of war. You want those cheap fossil fuels to build up your economy fast. But clean energy is better in the long run, even if it costs more at first. And this shows up in the game in all sorts of ways. Resource costs, pollution, even how the game ends and who wins.
Right, and the strategy comes from balancing those things. You want to grow and expand, but you also have to think about the environment. Every decision you make, where you build your first town, what kind of power plants you build, it all affects the environment, both your own footprint and the islands. It shows you how everything's connected.
And what really got me thinking is this is just a game about getting resources and building stuff, but it shows us these huge problems we have in the real world. It's not just game mechanics. It's like a mirror, reflecting those real choices we make and the consequences.
And it's smart how the game nudges you in a certain direction. The more renewable energy there is, the more likely you are to get those green events, which are probably less harmful. It's like the game is saying, hey, if we do this in the real world, good things might happen. It's hopeful.
It really makes you think. So here's something to consider. As you're thinking about all this, it's a tough question. Does Catan New Energies, through its rules and how you win, does it tell us something? Is it saying that we should choose long-term sustainability, even if it's harder at first, even if it costs more? Maybe it's not just a game. Maybe it's a way to think about the choices we face in our own world. What do you think about that?
That's a great question, and it's one that players will grapple with every time they sit down to play the game. It really forces you to think about priorities. Immediate benefit versus long-term consequences. It's not always an easy choice, just like in the real world, and the game doesn't provide any simple answers. But it does create a space to explore those complex issues in a way that's engaging and thought-provoking. Maybe that's the most valuable lesson it offers.
I think you're absolutely right. It's not about finding the right answer in the game. It's about understanding the complexities of the issue and how our choices can have ripple effects that we might not even anticipate at first. And maybe, just maybe, by playing games like this, we can start to have those important conversations and think more critically about how we approach these challenges in the real world. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Absolutely, it's been a pleasure. And I encourage everyone to try out Catan New Energies for themselves and see what insights they might uncover. It's a fun and engaging way to explore some really crucial ideas.
Until next time, keep those dice rolling and those minds thinking.
And keep those footprints in check.
Couldn't have said it better myself. See y'all soon.